What is the history of trial by jury in the UK? Do we have a right to jury trial?
Well, the history of it is, I think, is way back. It predates Magna Carta. It's certainly, Anglo-Saxon. And the Anglo-Saxons probably acquired it because of some means by which they had brushed with the thinking of classical Greece. But the idea of jury trial was enshrined again, was stated again. The right to jury trial was enshrined again in Magna Carta in 1215. In England, a jury is 12. In Scotland, it's 15. Traditionally, it was men. Traditionally, but obviously men and women now. The idea of trial by jury, and I'll probably butcher this because it is technical. The idea is that we as people are sovereign. Each one of us is a sovereign, and like the king, we are sovereign. The king is first among equals. And because we are sovereign, we are free, and we are entrusted, we are entitled to govern ourselves, effectively to do what we want, as long as what we want to do doesn't cause harm or damage to anybody else's life or property. You know, these are fundamentals. And the government, I mean, at the time of Magna Carta, the king was the government and government was the king. You know, there was no parliament when John put his seal to Magna Carta in 1215, but parliaments came thereafter. And where there is, so, you know, the idea is that if it's the king that's coming up with legislation, or if it's parliament coming up with legislation, there has to be a separate, independent constraint of that power. Because if the king can make and enforce any law and decide the punishment for it, and indeed the guilt of someone that he thinks has broken that law, then that king has total despotic power. Likewise, a government, if a government is in a position to, let's make it legal for us to have all the money in the country, all us 50, it's the law that we get all the money. A government will do that if it's allowed to do it. So the idea, the thinking before Magna Carta, back in Anglo-Saxon days, was that ultimate power would rest with the people. And the people, in the form of a jury, would judge the justice of the law. Say there's legislation that says you're not allowed to walk down the middle of the street with your sheep. Okay? And so someone gets arrested for walking down the middle of the street with his flock of sheep and comes before a jury, and it's a jury of his peers. So it's important that it be a jury of people who are like you, which is what peers means. So it wouldn't be like lords and ladies judging you and me, Paul. It would be other people like you and me would be selected to be the jury, because they can empathise with our circumstances. They know what it's like, more or less, to be someone like us. So so the accused person is brought in, and people, this is what this person did, and here's a drawing of him doing it, because we're too early for cameras. Right, this is him walking down the street with his sheep, and there's a law against that. The government made a law that said you aren't allowed to walk down the street with your sheep. Now, the jury is absolutely empowered to decide not only if that person did that, they can listen to the evidence and see if they thought he did it, but even if they think he did, if they think that is a stupid law, not being able to walk down the street with your sheep, they can annul that by jury. Get out. That's nonsense. Take your law about walking sheep down the street and stick it where the sun don't shine, and that guy walks. He's not guilty of anything, because my sense of right and wrong has been infringed. Me as a member of the jury, I've listened and I've watched and I know right from wrong. And take your legislation about walking sheep down the street and shove it. Not having that. And that's it. So not only is that person acquitted, walks free without stain on his character, but that law is like, don't bring that in front of me again. That's rubbish. That's annulled by jury. And furthermore, another way in which 95% of cases in this country are by, in England certainly, are by magistrates' court, where there is no jury. That's unlawful. It might be legal, but it's unlawful because you are entitled to a jury of your peers. Now, and where there is, now we've got majority. So they say the person, if you get like 12 people on the jury and 9 people think he's guilty and 3 people think he's innocent, he's guilty. It's a majority verdict. In terms of, in the essence, in the spirit of trial by jury, as it was envisioned by the people who restated it for the purposes of Magna Carta, 1 person out of 12, or indeed in Scotland, 1 person out of 15, finding that person innocent, then that person is innocent. That's how it works. So even if 14 out of 15 or 11 out of 12 say guilty, if there's 1 person on the jury that says innocent, he walks. That's how it's supposed to be. But in the intervening period, right, from 1215 onwards, governments have messed with it, parliaments have messed with it, because the Constitution, which really is embodied in the concept of trial by jury, judging the justice of the law, gets in their way. They're driving a steamroller and they want to steamroller over everything. And the Constitution, as it's manifest in trial by jury, is like a 10-foot high, 10-foot thick block of steel that their steamroller just bumps up against and can't get over, can't get past, and can't get through. And they hate it. And it's there precisely for that reason. That's why the Constitution is there. That's why trial by jury was enshrined in Magna Carta, is to get in the way of governments that want to do what they want to do, regardless of what the people think. That's what it's for. It's the constraint of power, because any parliament, any government that can legislate itself into a position where it can do what it wants will write itself into a position where it can do what it wants. You've got to watch these bastards 24 hours a day, and every time they try it, on your way.
Those elements of the law and legislation, they do seem to get hidden away, and even the jury, it seems to be shrouded in mystery. But
Paul, the judge, right? The judge. That's a name they came up with subsequently. The judge wasn't even called the judge. I can't even remember what the title of that little official was in the context of a trial by jury. But he was little more than an administrator. He was there. He wasn't even like an umpire. He was basically just there so that if the jury or a member of the jury wanted reminded about some, bit about a specific bit of legislation, remind me. What is it about that law? Tell me. Right, fine, right, thanks. We'll get on with it now because we're sovereign, we're the jury, we've got the power. And we'll get back to you when we've got a verdict, sort of thing. The judge, and because of the way things have gone, because of the way in which the judiciary have usurped the power of the people live in fear of the judge now in court. They walk in contempt of court and I'll tell you what to do, and you just sit there, you 12 nice people in England, or you 15 people in Scotland, and pretty much I'm the judge, and I'll listen to all of this, and I'll don't you worry, don't you worry your pretty little heads about it, I'll steer you in the right direction. That is an absolute corruption. That is an absolute travesty of trial by jury. It's the people, it's the jurors that do all of that. And by the same process by which one parliament after another has sought to big up its part and matter more than it was ever meant to, so have the judges. To hell with it. They're only there to because they've got like the big book of the big boys book of legislation, and they can look through it and tell you how it is written down. But we've allowed because we're all so bowy and scrapey. Oh, there's the judge. He's wig on. Oh, right. Let's let him tell us whether this person's guilty or innocent. It's not supposed to be like that at all. That's the way it's become, and it's all wrong. And it's because as people at school and all the rest of it, and we're not invited to know the truth. When you're sat down as a jury, the judge ought to. He or she is really absolutely supposed to tell you that as the jury you have the power, not just to judge not just to establish the guilt or innocence of the accused party, but to judge the justice of the law. The law is no more substantial than tissue paper. If the people in that jury, using their own innate sense of right and wrong, their own human consciences, listen to the proceedings in the court and decide what they think is the truth and give that judgment, that's absolutely paramount, and nothing else matters. Not the legislation, not the pomp and ceremony of the judge or anything. It's the sovereign power of the people at all times. Remember this, to judge the justice of the law.
It's so fascinating because when you break it down, you realise how powerful and actually how good it is. Because it seems like a much more effective way to do stuff to me.
You have to have it. You have to have it because if you accept that a government can draft legislation, pass legislation, and then decide what would be the penalties for being in breach of that legislation, if you accept that, then you accept tyranny. You are saying, he who remains silent is deemed to have granted his consent. If you witness that sequence of events, the drafting, the enacting, and the administering of punishment for, then you have accepted that you live in a tyranny. It's textbook definition. So do you or don't you accept tyranny? And if you don't, say so. Say no.